In the shadow of Mount Kilroy, where the forest swallowed sunlight and the air carried the scent of ancient secrets, a lone wanderer walked a path no one else dared to follow. People knew him only as the Walker, a quiet figure whose calm presence stirred whispers wherever he passed. No one knew his birthplace, his family, or the truth of his past, only that he carried a silence so deep it felt like a world within itself. His journey had not begun out of glory or ambition, but from a quiet realization that the world was full of invisible chains. He had watched people bind themselves to possessions, opinions, relationships, and fears, and he understood early that true freedom required walking away from everything that demanded pieces of the soul. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, he left his home without a word. His mother slept peacefully, his brother curled beside her, unaware that he was stepping into a life where he would belong to no one and nothing. He walked away knowing that the first test of freedom is sacrifice. For years, he wandered through forests and mountains with only a worn blade, a rope, and a small flask. When an old woman in a village questioned why he carried so little, he simply replied that the more a person carries, the more they stop. And when she said humans need support, he answered that the day one stops needing support, they move like the wind, unbound. In a bustling town, fighters mocked him, insisting he prove himself in the arena, but he turned away without hesitation, saying he had no need for the approval of those who watched. Praise was a trap, and he refused to be a prisoner of admiration. At a quiet lake one night, the moon reflected upon the still water like a mirror of the unseen world. He gazed at his reflection and asked himself who he was running from and what he was searching for. The lake gave no words, but its silence revealed the truth that solitude was not punishment. It was the doorway to reality. As he continued, he lived days in storms, nights in caves where the cold bit deep into his bones, yet he stayed where others would flee, facing not the world but the echoes within himself. Hunger, fear, loneliness, he welcomed all, not as enemies, but teachers. In the darkness, he confronted the deepest truth. He had nothing, no promise of safety, no guarantee of tomorrow, and yet he was free. When dawn finally broke through the mouth of the cave, he stepped out with a new stillness in his breath. Every step he took destroyed another invisible chain. The mountains greeted him, the forests parted for him, and the wind carried his name like a forgotten prayer. He was no longer just a man. He had become a traveler of the inner path, a being who walked without dependence, without desire, without fear. And though his journey was far from over, he moved forward with a spirit untouched by the world, carrying only the freedom he had carved with his own two hands. The walker moved farther into the wild valleys, where clouds touched the ground and the wind spoke in ancient tones, and as he walked, he felt the world revealing itself in ways no teacher could ever explain. One evening, he came across a small village, trembling under the fear of a roaming band of raiders who demanded tribute every month. The people begged the walker to help them, insisting that someone with his calm eyes and steady breath must know how to fight, but he only shook his head and told them that true strength wasn't the sword, it was the discipline to stand firm when the universe shook. Yet their desperation echoed through him, not because he sought praise or victory, but because their fear reminded him of the chains he once carried. That night he sat outside under a fading moon while the villagers whispered about him. Some called him a coward, others a wise man. He did not react. Their words were wind, their judgments passing clouds, and he remained unmoved. At midnight, the raiders arrived, drunk on violence, roaring through the fields, and before the villagers could hide, the walker stepped into the open road, unarmored and utterly still. The raiders laughed, mistaking his calm for weakness, but he breathed in deeply as if inhaling the entire landscape. When the first attacker charged, the walker moved not with rage or pride, but with the fluid certainty of someone who had cut fear out of his bones long ago. His blade remained sheathed as he evaded each strike with silent precision, until the raiders grew confused, then unsettled, then terrified, because they were facing not a man seeking to win, but a man who had nothing to lose. When one finally drew a weapon to kill, the walker disarmed him in a single motion, holding the blade by its dull edge and letting it fall to the earth as if proving that violence held no power over him. His stillness broke the raider's spirit more powerfully than any attack could. They retreated into the forest, shaken by a warrior who fought without fighting. The villagers gathered around him with awe, calling him savior, protector, hero, but he refused every title, stepping away from their gratitude. "Do not bind me with names," he whispered as he walked on, leaving them in stunned silence. The next week he journeyed into the stone hills, where cliffs rose like sleeping giants, and there he met a young traveler, restless, impulsive, full of questions. The boy followed him for days, asking how he fought without anger and why he never stayed anywhere long. Finally, the walker spoke, telling him that most people lose themselves not in war but in their own desires. The boy asked if walking alone wasn't painful. The walker answered softly that solitude is painful only until one realizes that the world has never truly been crowded. People simply carry noise within. As they continued, they crossed a desert where heat carved illusions into the horizon, where thirst taught them the truth of need and delusion. The boy complained, cursed the sun, stumbled, but the walker moved with the same calm stride, teaching through presence rather than words. He showed the boy how expectations create suffering, how wanting shelter makes sandstorms unbearable, how demanding comfort turns pain into an enemy. Days passed until they reached the far side of the desert, and the boy collapsed in tears, not from exhaustion, but from the realization that the true battle had been inside him. When he finally lifted his head, he found the walker watching with quiet understanding, and in that moment, the boy understood that the man before him was not chasing freedom, he was becoming it. And as the wind shifted across the dunes, the walker resumed his journey, for the path still stretched endlessly ahead, calling to the part of him that refused to belong to anything except the vast, unbound silence of the world. As the walker and the young traveler moved farther into the rugged lands beyond the desert, the world around them shifted into a realm untouched by the footsteps of ordinary men, a place where cliffs twisted like ancient limbs and the sky stretched endlessly, mirroring the vastness growing inside the boy. For days they walked without speaking until one afternoon they reached a narrow valley where abandoned shrines stood, their stones cracked, offerings turned to dust, and prayers forgotten by time. The boy asked why the shrines were deserted, and the walker replied that people often pray only when they want something, and when their desires fade or fail, they abandon even the sacred. This truth weighed heavily on the boy, who realized how often he himself had clung to hopes and dreams not because they were meaningful, but because he feared a life without direction. As they ventured deeper, the path grew steep and treacherous, yet the walker's steps remained steady, as if he carried within him a compass that pointed not to a destination, but to a state of being. And a truly free man carries nothing that owns a piece of his spirit. The boy felt his breath catch as he realized this was the final lesson, a lesson not taught through words but through surrender. Then, without warning, the forest breeze shifted, sweeping across the clearing like a whisper from the universe itself, and the walker told the boy that their paths would diverge from this moment. The boy protested, insisting he still had much to learn, but the walker shook his head gently and said that the purpose of a guide is never to create followers. It is to awaken walk. The boy felt a deep ache rise in his chest, not from fear, but from the understanding that this separation was necessary, that freedom could not bloom in the shadow of another man's footsteps. The walker stepped back, his expression calm, steady, ancient, and with a voice that carried the weight of countless miles. He told the boy that freedom is not an achievement. It is a lifelong vow, a discipline of the soul, a choice repeated with every sunrise. The forest grew still, as if witnessing something sacred, as the walker turned and began walking toward the deeper woods, where the mist swallowed his outline until he was no more than a ghost of movement. The boy watched him disappear, feeling both the sting of loss and the birth of something vast inside him. When the last trace of the walker vanished, the boy looked down at his own hands, realizing they trembled not from weakness, but from awakening. He understood now that the man he had followed was not a master of combat or survival. He was a master of letting go. Slowly, the boy closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and when he opened them again, the world seemed clearer, quieter, more honest. He took his first step, his own step, into the endless path before him, no longer walking behind someone else, no longer running from his past, but moving as one who had finally learned the meaning of total freedom. And though the forest stretched vast and mysterious around him, he felt no fear, for he had discovered the truth the walker had lived his entire life to teach, that the greatest journey is the one taken alone, and the greatest victory is the freedom carved from one's own soul.